Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're checking out this new Skrillex album. It's 2023, and it's a new Skrillex album. It's called Quest for Fire, and I've got a lot of mixed emotions about this one. Sonny Moore, also known as Skrillex, barely needs any introduction, is finally back after a 9-year gap in solo studio albums, with his last studio album being 2014's Recess. An album that, frankly, I'm not a huge fan of. However, over the years where Sonny has sort of stepped back from the spotlight and let some of the hype kind of cool down around his image and around his music, I've gained a lot more respect for the guy, just being one of those artists where the only time you end up hearing about him, it ends up being something really plain, really benign, and not anything particularly messed up. Like, as far as I've heard, there's no Bass Nectar-like situation here, which is really refreshing for an electronic artist. I just feel like any time I hear about some big electronic artist at this point nowadays, it's just because someone couldn't help but diddle someone else. Anyway, Skrillex is back with Quest for Fire, first record in a very long time, and it is a bit of a mixed bag, but I think that's to be expected with Skrillex having had some pretty deep influences from 90s house artists like BT or Fatboy Slim or Orbital, and taking those roots and bridging the gap into more modern, more contemporary artists with features like Fortet on this thing or Porter Robinson. And some of these features are better than others. There are certainly some really good moments like the Fortet feature, for instance, which I think is one of the better features here in general. But then there's this Aluna and Keto feature on Inhale Exhale, which sounds like a bad mix of trap beats and maybe like a sub-focus track from like 2012. And that is kind of a consistent issue here across the board, is that a lot of what is being brought to the table here are these flourishes of 90s house sensibilities blended with some of the worst of the early 2010s wave of electronic music, be it trip hop or trap. And I think you can see where Sonny is trying to go with these sounds, but some of these ideas that are being utilized here are so very dated, and that could work in some ways, and does, sort of. But what happens is you get tracks that feel initially pretty cohesive. There's strong concepts to base the fundamentals of these tracks on, but as the ideas develop, as these songs play out, it feels a bit more like a collection of song intros that don't really know where to go after maybe a couple of minutes. And these ideas really do try and float, but more often than not you get songs like Rumble, which is sort of this blend of trap and reggae, and not in a kind of make it Bundem way, but in a much less interesting sort of trancey kind of way, and that usually ends up being the worst of it. But on the other end of things, you get songs like Xena, which features a Palestinian singer whose name I'm not going to even try and pronounce because there's no way. But Sonny is playing to both of their strengths on this track. She is letting loose with some really beautiful Arabic singing, and Sonny is really leaning into some more heavy rhythm patterns and pulling from some of his earlier, more dubstep-oriented work, which he uses in moderation here surprisingly tastefully. So there are some moments here where things come together nicely. There's still a lot of rough moments, though, where tracks tend to kind of just drift into nothing. And then there's these tracks that feel complete but don't really seem like they went all the way, or it feels like the feature was kind of underutilized, like Too Bizarre, which mostly uses the feature as this kind of chopped up instrument for sampling, which is kind of cool in sort of like a Bjork a la The Powers That Be kind of way. But what Skrillex is doing here isn't nearly as good or as interesting as what the feature was already doing on their own. It's just so very hit and miss, which for this album is kind of rough because there's 15 tracks, which you would think would mean there's more chances for things to come together more cohesively, but in this case, it's really just more factors for dysfunction. And what a lot of these songs feel like, from what I'm getting listening to these tracks, it's like Sonny wrote several EPs worth of material and kind of just kept collecting tracks and eventually put them all out on this thing as one album instead of as EPs with their own sound and feel. Not that an album can't be multifaceted or can't show off an artist's versatility and reach, but some of these jumps, even just song to song, are so very different. There are so many moments that just don't fit well with each other, like you're trying to mix oil and water. And there are other points where things are just buttery smooth across the board, like the last third of this album, which comes together as a way more linked section of the record that makes me wonder why so much of this album felt so weird from one song to the next. And while the issues of somewhat weak blends of the old and the new do persist into this portion of the album, this definitely feels like the most well thought out chunk of music on the record. So yeah, the experience is a bit of a mixed bag. The whole album I certainly don't think is awful. There are some great moments here, in fact, but this album just has a lot of baggage that you wouldn't expect from someone this deep into their career. And I know it's only the second full-length record from Skrillex, but you would think that after all of this time that this electronic dance album would feel a little bit less offbeat. Anyway, Quest for Fire is a pretty decent 5. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe. Check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to everything is in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching again, and we'll see you on the flip side.